united with Christ. Meet local churches with open doors, serving throughout the Border Valley community and sharing the truth and hope of God's love and salvation. A presentation of Life Christian Broadcasting Television. And now, United with Christ.
Good morning. Welcome to United with Christ. Again, I'm Wally Chapman, your host, and we're doing a series with pastors who have had long ministries. And this morning I have a real good friend with us. His name is Jack Burg from Sun Valley Baptist Temple, and also they have Northeast Christian Academy at their church. And Jack and I have been friends for a long, long time. And so we're going to pick his brains. And if you have pastors, this series is going to be geared for pastors to go and find out things so they don't fall in ministry, or things that can help them in ministry. And this is number 4 in a series of 9. So we'll give you information on how to get a hold of that in a moment. But Jack, we're glad you're here. You're a good man, you know.
Oh, Wally, I appreciate being here, and I hope that some way, somehow, I can be a small help.
So you've been at Sun Valley how long?
I've been at Sun Valley now for 44 years, and
Wow.
That starts off as a youth pastor, and bus driver, and janitor, and all the other good stuff that you have to do to, this part of the ministry. I actually started in 1974, and under Art George, and you and I both remember Art as playing in the band and doing some of the things that we did. We opened up the school in 1977, and that was on a basis of kindergarten through 12th grade. It was very successful, and we quite quickly went to over 200 students. So from the standpoint of the school and all, it has been excellent, and a little tougher than I wanted, but I think that's kind of the normal.
That's sort of ministry, isn't it?
It's exactly. And of course, you're always back to the idea of what's the philosophy, what are you trying to teach, what's the basis for this, and I think the basis has always been is to try and teach kids to be Christian kids. And that's not always something that occurs quickly or easily, but takes a lot of iron sharpeneth iron, and a lot of times there's a lot of sparks.
Yep. Well, that's part of the reason our children went to your church, went to your school. Because we wanted, being in ministry, you don't want to lose your children.
No.
And so we decided that we would have what is taught at home and what is taught at church and what's taught at school be the same. And so all 4 of our daughters now are out serving the Lord somewhere. And it's sort of an encouragement to know that you sacrificed a lot to start with, because it costs to go to Christian school. And yet God has been honored. And now we've seen that there's 5 families serving the Lord instead of just 1, my wife and I, when we started. So that's a great thing to have as a Christian school. And it's still operating? Still
operating, still going. We are beginning our advertising for the 2017 or 2018, 2019, and getting ready to actually play ball this year with El Paso Homeschool and do fine arts and so forth with Hurricane Dave, and looking forward to some good improvements in many different ways, and also give us the manpower that we need to have a good time together.
Sure.
And to learn the character traits and so forth that come from.
Well, and that's so important, because there's not a lot of it being taught in our culture anymore.
No, there's not.
Just.
It's been, you're right, Wally. It's very little being taught, and it's been something that we've kind of lost track of, and lost track of the commitment, I think, more than anything else. And in El Paso, and nationwide. I shouldn't just say El Paso, but nationwide. So
Yeah.
we're certainly seeing that in our politics.
Sure. Yep. So what's kept you at Sun Valley all these years? You know, there's a lot of pastors that just move every 3 to 5 years, and you've been there a long time. What's kept you there?
I guess what you have to look at is as I said, I started off in 1974, and I started off with teenage kids, and you know, you've known both my kids, and
Yep.
You and Mark have cheated a lot on basketball.
Oh, he just shoved me around a lot, that was all.
He's not shoving anybody anymore. So, but you and Mark have played basketball together and all, and I think out of that, coming from with other Christians, even though the games were sometimes pretty rough and pretty tumble, he's told me not too long ago that it meant more to him now than it did then, and the things that he's learned.
Uh-huh.
He just about lost a son, so he's learned a lot of other lessons in life.
Sure. Now, you've had an interest in Israel for a long time, haven't you?
Yeah, I've had over 20 years trips to the nation of Israel, and of course, you and I have had a couple of trips to
Right.
the Ukraine, and
Right.
I've been to Poland twice, as well as to the Ukraine, teaching and gaining a lot of experience. I think sometimes we gained a whole lot more than I did anyway. I gained a lot more than what I taught.
And you think this is part of the thing that just kept you going with motivation and new feed into your own life that then you could pass on to others? And
I think you do, and I think you learn what. I think, Wally, more than anything else, you learn what the gospel means. Not too many years ago, I got it to preach in Navajo, Mexico. And as part of that preaching, I noticed that what I had in front of me were farmers that had been out in that field since daybreak. And, and I felt inside of me like, I am so short of these men. Mm-hmm. And their kids were there, the little girls. They had a whole family in front of me that had 3 or 4 girls in it. Their clothes were clean, their hair was neat, it was well kept, the house was well kept, and we picked up the kids, and I was really duly impressed with what I saw, and Mom and Dad were just exhausted, and I looked at that and thought I needed to change this message. I'm way off base. I have no clue of their faith in comparison to mine.
Yeah.
And so you learn a lot of saying, is Christianity practical? Does it have a practical side to it?
Yeah.
And the answer is yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Well, you're talking about the Indians. I have a friend who's a Messianic rabbi,
yeah,
and he said that when you look, if the Jewish or side of Christianity would have gone to the Indians, they'd have become Christians because of all the traditions, the feasts, the things that in many ways parallel the Indian culture. But it was the Catholics that went, and they had no relationship and couldn't relate to it, and so that's the way it goes. We got a friend who out in Chaparral, Ernie Nedia, he and his church have done an awful lot with the Indians. And it's just amazing how Christianity will fit if you take it to where their culture is and not expect them to bring their culture to us, huh?
Yeah. Well, I think that's true. I watched a Tara Umara Indian woman who literally ran over 20 miles. And she had an abscessed tooth. Mm-hmm. And she ran in, got the tooth pulled, got it fixed, and ran back in one day. And total mileage had to be somewhere up 25, 30 miles. And I thought I could no more have done that You know, I just could not believe, you know,
Right.
her speed, her stamina. And she actually worked with a dentist after she was done.
Sure.
And a lot of our women, you know, some of our assistants were beginning to turn a little pale, but yet just a complete driving force.
Sure.
And maybe, you know, Wally, maybe more than anything else, if I were looking at a young guy across the table, I would tell you the first thing in the world, if you're going to take this for a job, and if you're going to take this to see what you can get out of it, don't go. Stay home. And be something within the church. Be a pastor within the church, but stay home, because this is not intended to be a job. This is a ministry.
It's a calling, isn't it?
It is a calling.
When it's a calling, then you do whatever it takes. When it's a job, you look how you can get out of doing things.
And
So,
you know, having seen it at so many different points where you have you meet people that are they have a calling. You know they have a calling, and everything that they do revolves around that calling. I don't know what else you can ask for
sure.
more.
Well, what happened to you that gave you the reason to follow the Lord and go into ministry?
Well, of course, you know, you knew my late wife, Sue, and Sue was 16, and Sue had decided to go into full-time service. By the time she was 17, she changed her mind. But she changed her mind. However, God didn't change his. So when I was about 28, a little older than that, I swapped off and went into into the ministry also. And just before I did, I asked her before I left the pew. I said, you know what I have to do. And she said, I know. And we spent the next 44 years in the ministry at that point. And I've since remarried to Josie, and Josie's been a big helpmate. She didn't come looking originally, you know, at being part of the ministry as we normally think of it, but she's done a great job, and she's had more headaches than I can possibly imagine
Of course.
to fit in.
Right, right. So, a long ministry, what are the benefits and what would be the challenges that you'd have?
I have a young man coming into town here, and I won't mention his name, Wally, but he was at school when you were there as teaching for me. And I think that a couple of times probably either one of us could easily have hung him up on the net. He just kind of a constant irritant, you know. But, you know, I don't know why, but for some reason God told me and said, you know, hey, just stay with him. Stay with him. And today he is a businessman out of Midland, Odessa. He is a pastor for 4 different churches. He will be here speaking in El Paso. I can look at him and say, here's a man who's grown and matured. He now has the money to fund these churches, and he's done a great job. And no matter how you look at it, was it worth it? What I did before, I sold computers, and everything that I sold or did within that computer realm, it's not here anymore. It's gone. But with men like this young man, it's stayed, it's permanent, it's eternal.
Yep.
And you're not going to turn it around. And so it's something that is far, far better than than having just, you know, the fleeting moments that you get.
Yeah, and sometimes we forget that we're investing, don't we,
Right.
in the long picture. It's a big kingdom view, and when it's a big kingdom, you know, our church has had, and yours has too, lots of military come through. And it's almost like we're an oasis for them while they're in El Paso. And we had one family that left and came back and left and came back again. But, and sometimes people find us 6 months before they're transferred, or something is happening. And you're able to help folks on their journey, but you have to realize it's the big kingdom, because sometimes it can be really frustrating. You lose 10 or 15% of your congregation every year from transfers, and you wonder if you're ever going to get over the hump. But God's faithful, and He always keeps you going. And sometimes being in the desert, the oasis that's there, they look for it when they come back, and you just see a change in lives, don't you?
Yes, you do, and it's kind of amazing. I know that you've done at least one of my weddings.
Yeah.
And I've often laughed when you had to tell me and remind me that I was doing the wedding and not you. So since we both knew the process, but we kind of forget that we're here to minister in many different ways, one to another, and also to minister to those who are out there. And seeing a long ministry, you get to see the results of those people actually that you see the end result. If you see a good, well-raised Christian family, I didn't say perfect, but well-raised Christian family, and those men and women are able to sit down and say, this is what's occurred in our life. This is, and it's never been perfect.
Yeah.
It's not.
But isn't it nice to have a young person in the church, then you do the wedding for them, and then they're coming back, and you're doing the funeral for their parents, and you've sort of, it's a family thing. And it used to be people just stay together. Now everybody spreads so much that there's not that security, and having some security for people is good. How have you avoided burnout, or have you?
Sometimes sometimes you feel like you haven't avoided it. I guess if you mean by burnout, where you just reach a point where you really don't want to serve anymore, I don't think I have ever felt that. I have had. I remember doing some work around the school when we were putting in new buildings, and just picking up a crowbar, and I made it through both walls. And I thought that was quite an accomplishment. And you just are tired. And yet you turn around and look, and the room is not a room that's it's not just a room. It's where your kids are being taught. Kids are going to be disciplined. You're going to have things up. They're going to learn from this. And I know and you know that I have an interest in history and all, and I've had the opportunity to be able to look back and say, I've learned a lot. And you talked about the 20 trips to Israel, and you go through and walk through and see things, and you get to take the 1,000 steps up the back of Masada, or I'm sorry, of
Petra?
Petra.
Yeah, that was a char.
Oh, that was, yes, it was. And all of the things that you see, that you look back and think, how did they do this on a given day? How did they live this way? And how did they maintain their empires, and how did they maintain their strengths? Yeah. It also meant to me, sitting there one day looking and saying, here's David. David is the president. That's his term. That's the term we have in Scripture. And he is taking his title, his time. We see it in Scripture. We see where it comes from. And we are, without a shadow of a doubt, influenced by that, and seeing everything that's been influenced by it. And,
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed, and the Bible came alive after going to Israel those 2 times, just seeing where Jesus was, the lay of the land, this happened here, this happened there, and you go back, and I mean, I even used part of it on the Easter sunrise service I preached at this week. It was about the size of the Sea of Galilee and how the winds, the white water and all the roughness, and Jesus calms it, and and then when you told me about your scuba diving adventure under Caesarea, going through the harbor and all that, it just made so much difference. And you go there and just see what's going on. And I think it'd be great for every pastor to go. And if he can't afford it, someone in the church send him.
We would like to set up another trip, because I think it's worthwhile for any pastor to go, regardless of what his beliefs may be and so forth. But I think they need to experience it. I came up from underneath about 15 feet of harbor, and I was listening to 2 men scream at each other. And one of the men that was with me leaned across and said, "Don't learn this Hebrew. It's not good." And then I understood what he meant. But he said, looked at me and smiled. He said, "That's Peter and James." He said, "Or James and John." He says, "I don't care how it is. That's the 2 apostles."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had to think about that for a while, because it struck home to say that was our beginnings.
Yeah.
Then they're crude. They're not men that are necessarily the polished, shining examples. They're crude.
Right. James and John, the sons of thunder, right? Yeah. I mean, they were not quiet people, but man, God used them.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we have a few more minutes. Are there some things you give advice to a young guy? I know the culture's changed a lot since we started, and are there things that were there that are missing now that would be important for a young man to run the race all the way to the end and be faithful?
I would say if I were to encourage a young man in any way, one is you have to know the Word. You cannot go into the ministry without knowing the Word and knowing it well. And that secondly, as you learn that Word and you get to where you know it well, see how it applies. It's one thing to see Solomon. The flowers were more arrayed than was Solomon. Well, he's talking about the red. I think he's talking about the red Mediterranean poppy, and they're beautiful. They don't look like our poppies, but they're beautiful, and they really shine. And to me, to look at some of those things and say these are real, what God does, He does in time and space, and that I have a lot that I can learn, and that way, nothing ever gets to be old.
Yep.
It stays the same.
My naivety when I first went into ministry was I have a pretty good memory, and I don't want to read the Bible too much because I might get bored with it. And that was absolutely stupid and insane, because God brings it alive all the time.
Yep.
And one of the things I think in ministry is pastors need to spend time in the Word for themselves, not just to preach. It's your relationship with the God of creation, and He has special things for us. So I think it's so important, and it's hard because we're always so busy and so many demands.
I read an article last night on the city of Nain, N-A-I-N, and it was a debate over two men in Scripture who were debating about which is the shortest route to Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is, today it's right outside of Tiberias. And it still runs. There used to be ox carts, now it's very nice buses and everything. It's, and I thought, nothing's changed. It's the same. Mm-hmm. And and I think, frankly, this is Hallmark will shoot me, but I look at Mary, Is she on a donkey on the last, on that last month? Or is she in some sort of a cart, whatever it may be? I think she's on a cart. I think she's comfortable. I think it's a totally different picture than what we have of it.
Yeah. Well, it's like the manger scenes that we see with those sticks, when really a feeding trough was chiseled out of limestone.
Yeah.
And, every time Christmas comes, I stick manger up at the church with a picture I took at Megiddo of that, and letting people know. And we need to look at the scriptures and see what they really say. I've said to a lot of people say, well, this is what the scripture means to me. No. What does the scripture mean? You adjust to the scripture. You don't try to fit it into what you want to do or whatever. And there's a lot of things that are really interesting when you find out the real meaning. What is there that we just overlook because of our culture or society or whatever.
I agree. And I think if you keep that in focus and you keep the fact that people are the same today as they were 2,000 years ago, you won't grow old. Mm-hmm. Or let's put it this way, you won't grow any older than what you look. So.
Right, and you don't go stale.
You don't go stale.
You stay fresh, and that's so key for people. And in a long ministry, you really need to keep fresh in your preaching. Otherwise, people are saying, well, what's he doing this time? What's he doing that time? I've heard that 4 times before, and I've heard that happen in churches. I mean, sometimes illustrations in that, but we need to be fresh. And,
and you had to make a choice, Wally, with what was the truth of Scripture, and I think that's where you come down to it.
Right.
You make that choice whether I follow Scripture or whether I follow a denomination or whatever it is.
Right. Well, we're getting near the end, and I want to put this in before we finish. This series with today with Jack Burg and the last 3 weeks is going to be on you. If you go to YouTube, then hit Life Christian TV, and then look Wally Chapman interview series, you'll be able to look at all the pastors. And if you have a young friend who's a pastor or someone out of town, some of the information coming through these men of wisdom and who've been in ministry a long time can really be an encouragement and a help for those who aren't here. Maybe you know people on the mission field. All of this is available through the internet. And so you and I have an opportunity to get some education, some practical education to ministers, missionaries, and others around that can really help them in their journey. So put that down. YouTube, go to Life Christian TV, and then Wally Chapman interview series, and there'll be 5 more that will follow. Thanks for being with us today. Jack, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Wally.
And we will see you next week on United with Christ. God bless you.